I have been to many weddings in my life. I was also a Year 12 teacher for nearly 10 years and had the privilege of attending a whole bunch of Year 12 formals too. Hands down, my favorite part of a fancy event like a wedding or a formal or a ball is this. I love seeing the women who have started the night like elaborate princesses. They're wearing beautiful dresses and they have flawless makeup, and their hair is in some sort of up style which has taken hours and 1,000 bobby pins and an entire can of hairspray. But at the end of the night, universally, there comes a moment when women across the room decide that they can no longer handle the restraints of the extravagant shoes that they've forced their now swollen and blistered and throbbing feet into. And so they kick off their shoes and they either dance uninhibited by those shoes or they make their way home hobbling but free, unhindered by the shoe. It's a funny thing how we go to such lengths to present this unblemished image to the people around us, isn't it? And women aren't the only ones polishing themselves up at a wedding. The men dress up too in fancy clothes that they only pull out of their wardrobe for weddings and for engagements. The mothers of the bride, they suddenly feel compelled to wear a two-piece sequin suit that they will only wear once in their lifetime. The bride and the groom present the very best version of themselves to each other on the day. Like, this is the best it's ever going to be. This is the thinnest I'll be. This is the most hair I'll have. This is the tannest I'll be. It's the best outfit that I will ever put on for you. Enjoy today, because when we wake up tomorrow, reality will look pretty different. Imagine if at a wedding, the bride and the groom presented all the bits to each other that they normally hide, like unshaven legs or day 5 hair before it cannot do another day of dry shampoo, or your sweat-stained shirt, or jeans with sneakers because they're more comfortable. Can you imagine that picture of a bride and groom saying, "These are all the bits about me to accept, but can you stand here today in front of our loved ones and accept all of me?" We go to great lengths to hide our imperfections from each other, and not just at weddings, but in life. Our houses are cleaner when guests come. Our socials present our very best lives. We parent more patiently when others are watching. We eat smaller portion sizes when we're worried that, 10 donuts might appear to be too many. We're scared for people to see the real version. I think maybe we're scared to be vulnerable and even exposed. I want to read to you a story from John 13, which I think will feel familiar for a lot of you. But then I want to ask us about our own willingness to be vulnerable. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, he took off his robe, he wrapped a towel around his waist, and he poured water into a basin. And then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, You don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will." "No," Peter protested, "you will never, ever wash my feet." Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't belong to me." So it's Passover time in Jerusalem, which means that there are literally hundreds of thousands of people in the city, plus their wives and their children and their animals. Can you picture what the roads and the alleys might have looked like? The people wore sandals, which means that the soles of their feet were protected, but it didn't make for a very clean foot. And in this moment, we see Jesus, the Messiah, the rabbi, who has just been celebrated by streets lined with people throwing their coats and waving palm branches. That same man is filling a basin with water in this story. Now, cleaning the feet of house guests was a very normal practice of the day because, as I mentioned, there was bacteria and germs and all sorts of grime coming into a person's home on the feet of their guests. But washing a visitor's feet was mucky work. It was work for the lowliest in the community, not the important people, not the decision makers or the landowners or the judges and bosses, the least. It was a job that was reserved for servants, for the women, the children, a job reserved for the foreigners. I wonder if you have ever worn thongs or sandals or slides to the royal show. Think about what your feet look like after a day of walking in crowds, walking through dusty stalls, into the barns with the animals and their hay and their waste, over the dewy, grassy areas, through the sideshow area where someone has maybe lost their stomach on a ride and then sawdust has been layered over it to soak up that disaster. At the end of the day, the strap marks from your shoes, which have protected your feet all day, reveal just how mucky the rest of your feet have become. I think this gives us a slight idea of what Jesus is kneeling to hold and to wipe away. When Jesus held their feet, I think he might have gotten some idea of where that person had walked. I have a pair of sneakers for the gym, and my gym sneakers can only do a certain amount of Ks before they are no good anymore. Before, like, the tread on the bottom has started to wear off, or the glue attaching the different parts is starting to loosen and create spots that might make me stumble. You can tell how new my shoes are by looking at them. I just recently bought a new pair because my old ones were finished, and my new shoes are pristine. You can tell by looking at them that I have not done a lot of exercise in those shoes. Do you think that when Jesus looked at their feet, he could tell if they were feet that had been in a clean house all day? Or maybe feet that had walked a lot, or feet that had been roughened by salty water? Maybe they were feet that really smelt because they had been walking in muck and mire all day, treating animals, perhaps. As a mum, one of the things that I love the most is seeing the bathwater on a day where my kids have been busy having adventures all day. I can tell the kind of day that it's been by looking at the bath water. I can see if they've played outside, or if they've gotten muddy, if they've maybe been scraped and cut from climbing trees and falling off bikes. On a day that has been adventurous, my children are submerged into the warm, soapy bath water, caked in muck and dirt. And when they emerge, it's all been washed away. The water is murky and grimy and black, but they are clean and refreshed. What would my bath look like at the end of the day? How murky would the water be? I don't see a lot of people taking Instagram-worthy pictures at the end of their bath, do you? Maybe the start, the bath bomb and the candles and the glass of wine, but not the soap scum left around the edges. Would there be daily mistakes that I wanted the bath to wash away? Maybe some sins that I hoped that no one would ever see. Maybe it was the TV show that I felt a little bit awkward about watching. Maybe a work expenditure that I wrote off and that I knew was a little bit sketchy. Maybe that harsh word that I said to my husband, Damien, that I knew really hurt him. Or maybe a snide, judgmental comment that I made about someone to help me feel better about myself. What mucky stuff would I find in my bath? Do I have wounds I need to bathe? Injuries that I'm carrying that no one sees? Have you ever had someone care for a wound? Or maybe you can remember a parent cleaning a graze from childhood, or picking out the bits of gravel and washing the stinging graze with water and iodine. Or maybe you've had like a bad wound, a deep wound, an infected wound. Do you remember how it felt to have someone touch that raw flesh? The sensitivity as they held your skin, maybe the embarrassment as they wiped away the infections and dressed the wounds. These are the parts of the story that help us to form the context of what Jesus is doing in this moment. He has seen where the disciples have been. He approaches the dirt and the waste and the stench. He touches the wounds that have compiled. But Peter, he will have none of it in this moment, will he? I don't know if it's the fact that he feels like he's asking the Queen of England to wash his royal show feet, or the idea that Jesus will even see and know just how awful they are. But he tells Jesus he can't do it. In this moment, Peter is being asked to be entirely vulnerable. I've really struggled with vulnerability at times in my life. When Damien and I started dating, he was just a new Christian. And like any couple dating, at some point, you have to decide to let your guard down. And so as the weeks and the months went by, I started realizing that I think I might maybe love this guy. But that was scary for me because I did not want to marry someone who didn't want to spend their life serving God. And I remember deeply anguishing, thinking, I don't want to be vulnerable here. I don't want to show too much of myself. I don't want to get too committed. What if I give this person my heart and I get heartbroken because he's not who he says he is? I wonder if you have ever struggled with vulnerability. I wonder if you've experienced moments in your life when letting down your guard meant risking being hurt. I wonder if there are parts of you that struggle to be vulnerable with Jesus. Maybe it feels like opening Pandora's box. Like if I talk to God about my depression and my anxiety, I might spiral out of control. Or if I talk to Jesus about my sexual sin, then I'll feel yuck and vulnerable. Or if I tell God that I don't want to forgive, that I want to stay angry, that He won't understand. I think that because we love with limitations, we expect that God will too. I think that because we have experienced people's love with but only if yous attached, that we expect that God does too. I wonder if in this moment, Peter is processing the same emotions, whether he was thinking, no, you are the Messiah. You are God. ask you to wash my feet. My feet have dirt and wounds. My feet are private, and I don't want you to see this bit. It's too much. We love the genie in a bottle God that we can go to ask for stuff. We're like the creator of the universe, big, amazing God. But I wonder if maybe the personal, intimate, close when we are broken, sees us when we are desperate, can handle our vulnerability God is too raw for us. It's too close. It's too intimate. Would require us to acknowledge our imperfection. And our approach to God perhaps limited by our ability to be honest with ourselves? When I was preparing my sermon on the promises of God, I was reading through Joshua, and I was struck by the moment that God asks Joshua to remove his shoes because he is standing on holy ground. Joshua 5, when Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, "Are you friend or foe?" "Neither one," he replied. "I am the commander of the Lord's army." At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. "I am at your command," Joshua said. "What do you want your servant to do?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did as he was told. The reason that it struck me was because I always remembered this was a moment that happened for Moses. And it did happen for Moses too. In Exodus 3, verse 5, "Do not come any closer," the Lord warned. "Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground." This is the God that Peter knows, the God that demands our reverence and our honor. And in both moments, God is asking both Moses and Joshua to humble themselves and to show reverence to God by removing their shoes. And Peter is right to see God through this lens. Look at verse 3 of chapter 13. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. This was God incarnate, the holy God of Israel. He had all authority over everything, and he was about to return to heaven to sit at the right hand of the Father. This kind of view of God as holy and righteous and all powerful is right. But in Jesus, God is revealing to us a relational God, a God that is present with us, a God that sees us and sees our predicament. This act, Jesus removing the shoes of his disciples, the same holy God of Joshua and Moses, is demonstrating his lavish act of grace and love by making himself lowly, washing their feet and making them clean. There have certainly been moments in my life where, like Peter, I have wanted to hide from God, where I've felt that there are parts of me that are too broken, too complicated, too messy. Certainly, as a female leading a group of people, I often doubt whether I am enough, whether my whole being is good enough for God, or whether people will look at my deficiencies and say, "Why did God choose to use her?" Sometimes I wish that what I was presenting to Jesus looked differently, was maybe more capable, but this is what Jesus demands. He takes all of me and he welcomes me. He washes me and he loves me still. If we read on in John or in any of the Gospels, we know that the event that follows the washing of the disciples' feet is the Last Supper. It's the communion table. It's the final meal that Jesus shares with his friends. And in this moment, he has set a platform for community that will be formed. Jesus has washed them. He's restored them. He's made the choice to see their brokenness and still include them. And in this way, he equalizes the community of believers. They eat this meal all having been made clean by Jesus. It didn't matter if you had a little bit of dirt or a lot of dirt. Now they are all clean. They are all included. They are all welcome. And he goes further because in John 13:14, Jesus says, "And since I, the Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet." Jesus wants us to model his servanthood to others. But consider this, our ability to be vulnerable, to allow Jesus to have access to all of us, even the bits we'd rather hide, frees those around us to also experience vulnerability. We can wash others. We can take that lowly place of the servant who humbly and graciously, kindly and lovingly holds the vulnerability of others, only if we first allow Jesus to do it for us. Do you want to see the people around you restored? Do you want to see lives made whole? Do you want to see your community open themselves to Jesus? You must first allow him to do it in you. So, why does this story matter for you today? Why should a Jewish man walking a far off country thousands of years ago change your life today? Because that same Jesus who was willing to lovingly kneel before a rabble of people who hadn't worked it all out yet, who didn't know how they fit or even how the story was going to play out, who gently took their muck and their wounds and he made them clean. He wants to do the same in your life. And even though we compartmentalize our lives, he is asking to see all of you. We compartmentalize our faith and we separate God out from our work lives or our family lives. We relegate Jesus to Sunday and we don't let him have every part of us. I think we're like Peter saying, "No, you shall never wash my feet." That bit you can't have. That bit is too messed up, even for you. Or maybe if we're honest, we'd just rather go somewhere other than Jesus. If we are dirty or wounded, we'd just rather find the solution somewhere else. And we look to other answers for the bits that hurt. What does my family say? What does Google say? What does YouTubers say? What do influencers say? We ask people to fix it for us if we let anyone see the hurt at all. We try to shut Jesus out of the bits that we don't think that he can handle or that we don't want him to see. But listen to what Jesus responds to Peter. "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." To experience salvation, you must be washed by him. You must accept your brokenness and your need to be cleaned. You must accept that you can't clean yourself. You can't heal yourself. We must recognize our need for only Christ, and we must accept it in order to be saved, restored, made whole. You must be vulnerable and let Jesus have every bit, and you must trust him with your heart. You have to risk being too invested. It's an all or nothing equation. He can handle your anxiety, your self-righteousness. He can handle the abuse and the scars. He can handle your pride and your human striving. Today, Jesus is kneeling before you, inviting you to take off your shoes. So, will you let him wash you?